Kingston, Jamaica. A Tuesday evening. Christopher Miller was surveying the Maxfield Avenue area on his green and white CBR, the same motorcycle he rode every day, the same one he never fully switched off, because a man in his position could not afford the 3 seconds it took to restart an engine when someone wanted him dead. He noticed the parked police vehicles. He noticed the men who looked like they were waiting for something. He kept moving. 2 men stepped out from the shadows with handguns. The distance between them and their target was close enough that missing should not have been possible. The first bullet grazed his back. The second hit the bike. In the fraction of a second that followed, Nu Puss accelerated up the road, drew his own weapon while riding, and fired back. 3 shots connected with one attacker. The other man fled. He did not stop. He did not call anyone. He did not pull over to assess the damage to the bike or treat the graze on his back. He continued the survey of Maxfield Avenue, as if what had just happened was a routine inconvenience. The kind of thing that might delay a normal person's evening but did not, in his world, constitute an interruption worth acknowledging. Most men, after being shot at, would have gone home. He went back to work. His name was Christopher Miller. Tivoli Gardens called him Nu Puss. And in the specific hierarchy of West Kingston, where men were ranked not by wealth or age but by the kind of fear they could generate and survive, he sat at number 2, second only to Christopher dodged bullets Dudus Coke himself. Children lined the streets at night just to see him pass. This is the story of what a community produces when it is abandoned by every institution that was supposed to care for it, and what happens to that product when the community no longer needs it. Tivoli Gardens was not supposed to be a garrison. It was built between 1963 and 1965 as a housing renewal project in West Kingston. New concrete apartment blocks replacing the back-a-wall settlement, which had been condemned as the worst slum in the Caribbean, where 3 communal standpipes and 2 public bathrooms served more than 5,000 people. The new development was named after a theater. It was supposed to represent something better. What it became instead was the most militarized political constituency in Jamaican history. Edward Seaga, the Jamaica Labour Party politician who represented West Kingston from 1963 until his retirement in 2005, presided over Tivoli's development and its transformation. The garrison community model that took hold across Kingston in the 1970s, where voting communities were effectively controlled through a combination of patronage, protection, and political violence, found one of its purest expressions in Tivoli. The community produced loyalty to the JLP because the JLP provided the community with what the Jamaican state had never bothered to supply: security, income, and the enforcement of a local order that, however brutal from the outside, felt like stability to the people who lived inside it. By the time Nu Puss came of age in the years when Lester Jim Brown Coke was transitioning his hold over Tivoli to his son Christopher, the community had been sealed off from standard policing for 3 decades. No permanent police station operated within its boundaries. Officers who entered did so knowing they might not come out. The Jamaican Constabulary Force acknowledged, in testimony before a commission of inquiry years later, that it had been functionally unable to conduct regular policing in Tivoli Gardens for 30 years before 2010. Into that space, the space that the state vacated, something filled in. It always does. Nu Puss came from Anna Town, a community in West Kingston whose relationship with Tivoli was not one of geography, but of alignment. The invisible borders that divided West Kingston were political before they were physical, and Anna Town and Tivoli occupied the same side of the most important border in the area. The line between JLP and PNP, between the Shower Posse and every organization that opposed it. He was not exceptional in his origins. He was exceptional in what he became within a system that had already decided what kind of man it needed. There is a particular kind of reputation that exists only in environments where conventional forms of achievement are unavailable. In Tivoli Gardens, in the late 1990s and early 2000s, the hierarchy was understood by everyone who lived within it, and by most people who lived adjacent to it. Christopher Dudus Coke sat at the top, inheriting from his father a position that combined the functions of a community patron, a political organizer, a criminal entrepreneur, and a local sovereign. Below him, the ranking was determined by a combination of loyalty, demonstrated capacity for violence, and the specific quality of fearlessness that distinguished someone the community would follow from someone the community merely avoided. Nu Puss was ranked second. The motorcycle was not a vehicle. It was a statement. The green and white CBR that he rode through the streets of West Kingston was the most recognizable object in the community after Dudus himself. A moving announcement that Nu Puss was present, was watching, and was not worried about being seen. He practiced his riding daily, combining the performance techniques of a stunt rider with the tactical requirements of someone who might need to discharge a weapon while in motion at speed. This was not casual hobby maintenance. This was professional development. He was, by multiple accounts, genuinely talented on the bike. People who had no connection to the criminal world came to watch him perform. Children who could not have understood the full dimensions of what they were witnessing, lined the streets at night when he was known to be riding. That detail is the one that should stop you, not the violence, not the murders, the children, the ones who lined up to watch him pass, the ones for whom a man with a gun on a motorcycle represented something aspirational rather than something to fear. Those children were 8, 9, 10 years old in 2001. They are adults now. Some of them became what they watched. Some of them watched what he became. None of them chose the system that made that the available education. His character, alongside the skill, carried a specific toxicity. He did not tolerate being laughed at. In one documented incident, he held a lighter under the chin of an associate named Lizard Egg, burning off his facial hair because he believed the man had been threatened and denied it. He called it a prank. Egg did not find it funny. Nu Puss did not care whether Egg found it funny. The relationship between Christopher Miller and Christopher Coke was not the one that most accounts describe. Nu Puss was not, in origin, Dudus's man. He had been assigned, the verb is appropriate, because these assignments were made rather than volunteered for in the world they inhabited, as the primary hitman for Dudus's brother. The brother died before that arrangement could fully develop. Nu Puss was then absorbed into Dudus's own operation, carrying with him the skills and reputation he had already accumulated, now directed by a different Coke than the one he had originally been positioned to serve. This matters more than it appears to. A man who was personally loyal to Dudus from the beginning would have been shaped by that relationship from its earliest stages, would have developed his understanding of the organization's priorities, its protocols, its unspoken boundaries, through sustained proximity to the person who set them. He would have internalized not just the orders, but the reasoning behind the orders. He would have understood, instinctively, where the lines were, because he had watched them being drawn. Nu Puss came to Dudus already formed, already practiced in a way that was not oriented specifically toward Dudus's particular conception of how Tivoli should function. He brought his own instincts, his own thresholds, his own understanding of when situations required a response that could not wait for authorization to travel up and back down a chain of command. Dudus built Tivoli on a specific kind of order. His authority rested on violence, certainly, but more precisely on the credible claim that he controlled the violence. That it happened when he decided it should happen, stopped when he decided it should stop, and that everyone within the walls understood those parameters and operated within them. The community functioned because people believed the rules applied consistently, and because they believed that belief was correct. A soldier who operated outside those rules, who made independent decisions about when retribution was warranted, and then executed those decisions before any authorization could be given or denied. It's something more troubling than a loose cannon. He was evidence that the system had a structural weakness, that there existed, within Tivoli's tightly organized hierarchy, a man powerful enough to act unilaterally and consequential enough that the Don could not respond to the action without acknowledging the weakness it revealed. Nu Puss operated, at the most consequential moment of his career, without Dudus's sanction, and Dudus did not punish him. What that silence meant, whether it was fear, calculation, unstated approval that could not be publicly acknowledged, or simply the pragmatic recognition that punishing someone of Nu Puss's standing would create more instability than absorbing the consequences of his action, is the question at the center of this story. It is a question nobody who knew the answer has ever publicly answered. January 3rd, 2001. Kingston Public Hospital occupied a specific and contradictory space in the daily life of West Kingston. It was the largest public hospital in Jamaica, the place where the population of the surrounding garrison communities came when they were injured, sick, giving birth, or dying. It was also, as a result of its geography and the nature of the violence that surrounded it, a place where the lines between the medical world and the criminal one were regularly and involuntarily crossed. 4 men walked into Ward 3 that morning. Not at night, not in the confusion of an emergency. In the middle of a functioning hospital day, with patients in beds, staff at stations, and the ordinary domestic noise of an institution trying to do its work. Their target was Nokia Broderick, 19 years old, known as Bunny Lee, who was recovering from an injury in a bed on Ward 3, under the supervision of a police guard. The guard was District Constable Oswald Thompson, 60 years old, 30 years into a career spent doing the dull and necessary work of the Jamaica Constabulary Force. Bunny Lee was in custody. He was under guard. He was inside a hospital. He was, in the logic of the system that produced the men who came for him, a liability. Someone who knew something, or was positioned to know something, or had become associated with something that required his permanent silence before any institutional process could make him useful. Thompson was killed first. Broderick was killed immediately after. 3 other people in the ward were shot and wounded, 2 of them hospital employees who were simply there. The gunman took Thompson's service revolver and his 8 remaining rounds of ammunition before leaving. The staff who survived described what followed as traumatic in a way that ordinary criminal violence, as experienced in the surrounding community, was not. This was not a shooting on a street corner. This was a shooting in a place that was supposed to be exempt, a space where, even by the informal rules of garrison warfare, certain protections were supposed to apply. Those protections did not apply. They never had. Nu Puss and the men with him had simply made the logic explicit. He was arrested 13 months later, caught in January 2002 at a bus terminus in Denham Town. The charges were formally entered. The warrants had been outstanding since the morning of the shooting. When the case came to court, nobody testified. July 7, 2001. 6 months after the Kingston Public Hospital shooting, the police entered Tivoli Gardens. The official reason was a search for weapons connected to the murder of Willie Haggart, the Don of the rival Arnett Gardens community, whose killing had triggered weeks of political gang violence across the western parishes of Kingston. They found one gun. They did not leave. What followed over the next 48 hours was a confrontation that left 20 civilians, 1 police officer, and 1 soldier dead. How exactly those 20 civilians died, whether in crossfire, through targeted killings by police, or at the hands of community gunmen who used the chaos to settle their own accounts, was never definitively established. A commission of inquiry was held. It concluded nothing actionable. No one was charged with any of the civilian deaths. The commission's report acknowledged that the truth about what happened was effectively unavailable. Nu Puss was at the entrance to Tivoli that night. The description of his position, holding the gateway to the community against the security forces, his presence making it sufficiently dangerous that even Renato Adams's determined advance paused at the threshold, is not the description of a soldier following orders. It is the description of someone who had made a decision about what this place meant to him and was prepared to die expressing it. He did not die. The community held. The police eventually withdrew. The 20 bodies were buried in the days that followed, and the questions about how they died were absorbed into the same silence that absorbed every other question about what happened inside Tivoli Gardens. He had survived another night. He always survived the night. Drop your thoughts below. Who do you think was really in control of Tivoli Gardens in 2001? Dudus, or the men like Nu Puss who held the walls? Subscribe to Caribbean Underworld. New videos every day. May 3, 2005. The sequence of events that defined the last chapter of Nu Puss's story began not with him, but with a confrontation at the intersection of West King's House and Waterloo Roads in Kingston, where Corporal Hewitt Chandler of the Protective Services Division was murdered by 2 men from Tivoli Gardens, Christopher Coke, 23 years old, and a man known only as Jello. Minutes later, officers located and shot both of them dead. By nightfall, Tivoli Gardens had processed the news. Coke was the brother of the Don. His death was not a police operation to be absorbed and moved past. In the specific moral accounting of garrison life, a killing demanded a response, not because the rules of the community required it, but because a Don who did not respond to the killing of a family member had demonstrated a vulnerability that rivals would immediately exploit. What happened next did not receive Dudus's authorization. Inspector Lascelles Walsh of the Motorized Traffic Division was shot dead at a traffic light on Port Royal Street in downtown Kingston. He was sitting in his vehicle. He had no warning and no opportunity to defend himself. Hours later, gunmen attacked the Crossroads police station. District Constable Canute Brown died in that attack. A security guard was killed alongside Inspector Walsh at the Port Royal Street location. 3 members of the security forces killed in a single day. None of the killings were authorized by Dudus Coke. This is the fact that every account of Nu Puss mentions, and none of them fully examines. Dudus's power in Tivoli rested on a specific kind of organizational control, on the credible claim that he decided what happened, and that what happened was the result of his decision. An enforcer who killed 3 police officers without authorization was not a loyal soldier who had exceeded his brief. He was a demonstration that the organization's authority structure had a gap in it, that there existed, within Tivoli's boundaries, a man powerful enough to act independently of the Don and consequential enough that the Don could not respond to it. Dudus said nothing publicly. No discipline followed. No acknowledgement was made. The silence was the statement. What it said was something Dudus could not afford to clarify. Inspector Walsh had been sitting at a traffic light. Constable Brown had been inside a police station. Neither of them had done anything that morning that was different from what they had done on every other morning of their careers. They were simply there, on the wrong side of a logic that had nothing to do with them and everything to do with the grief of a community that had just lost someone it considered family. Their deaths produced a formal investigation. Nu Puss was identified as the primary suspect in the Walsh and Brown killings. Warrants were issued. His name went to the top of the most wanted list. He was arrested in May 2006 in an operation on Cassia Park Road in St. Andrew. A senior officer at the Denham Town Police Station, when asked about the arrest, said, "This man was one of the main suspects in those murders, and he was arrested by the police. However, persons who witnessed the murders and persons who the police relied on to give information did not turn up to do their part. Nobody came forward. He was released." The 2 years between his release in 2006 and his death in August 2008 are the least documented portion of Christopher Miller's life. He had been the most wanted man in Jamaica. He had been arrested, charged, and freed because the witnesses who had watched him shoot a senior police officer at a traffic light decided, collectively and individually, that what they had seen was not something they were prepared to describe in court. What that decision cost them personally, in fear, in the practical reorganization of their daily lives around what they knew and had chosen not to say, is not recorded anywhere. The record only captures what people did. It rarely captures what it cost them to do it. He was somewhere. He was moving. The motorcycle, presumably, was still running. His last confirmed living location was Nago Head in St. Catherine, where he had gone to visit the mother of his children on a Saturday evening in August 2008. He was comfortable there. He was in clothes that said he was not expecting trouble. Shorts and a mesh marina, the kind of thing you wear when you are somewhere you feel safe, with someone you trust. He was found the following Sunday morning on Goshen Road in Bernard Lodge, a lonely stretch of St. Catherine that had no obvious connection to anything in his known life. He was wearing shorts and a mesh marina. That was all. The car believed to have been driven by him was found burned along the Lakes Penn Main Road at 1 in the morning, hours before his body was discovered 7 miles away. The police who arrived at the scene found no spent shells, no evidence of a shooting in that location, no indication of what had happened in the hours between when he left the woman in Nago Head and when the residents of Goshen Road found him. He had been killed somewhere else, and his body had been moved. Someone had taken the time to relocate the evidence. Someone had taken the time to burn the car. The official accounting of Nu Puss's death is brief. His body was found. The police investigated. No one has been charged, 16 years later, with killing him. Jamaica Observer's coverage noted that his killing had generated significant speculation, including rumors connecting it to a prominent figure within Tivoli Gardens itself. That sentence, specific enough to establish that people within the community knew something, vague enough to protect everyone who would have been endangered by specificity, is the closest the public record comes to an answer. 3 possibilities exist, and none of them can be confirmed. The first is that Dudus ordered it. By 2008, the American extradition request for Dudus was already moving through diplomatic and legal channels. His position was more exposed than it had been at any point in his tenure as Don. The Americans were building a case. The Jamaican government was under pressure to respond. A man who had demonstrated 3 years earlier that he could act outside the Don's authority, killing 3 police officers and generating enormous institutional pressure on the community without sanction, was a liability that a Don under existential threat could not afford to carry. Nu Puss represented a proof of concept that the Don's control was incomplete, that someone inside the walls could act autonomously and survive the consequences. Eliminating that proof, quietly, was the most rational available option. The second possibility is that someone below Dudus, someone who wanted to move up in the structure, identified Nu Puss as the obstacle between their current position and the place they wanted to occupy. The garrison community had its own internal competition, its own ladder. Removing the man who stood at the top of it was the most direct path upward for the person standing immediately below. The third possibility is the one that the Jamaican police would have preferred, that the killing was carried out by or on behalf of the security forces, as an extrajudicial response to the murders of Inspector Walsh and Constable Brown. The men who served alongside Walsh and Brown had watched the formal justice process fail. A police officer had been shot at a traffic light in broad daylight. The killer had been arrested, held, and released because nobody would testify. If formal justice was unavailable, informal justice took its place. None of these explanations has been confirmed. All of them are consistent with what is known. What is certain is that the man who was never caught in a gunfight, who dodged bullets at traffic lights, and held the entrance of Tivoli Gardens against the security forces, and walked out of a murder charge because an entire community chose silence, was killed by someone he was comfortable enough around to take his shirt off. The most dangerous enemy he ever faced was the one he trusted. The wall where the mural of Nu Puss was painted is still there. Tivoli Gardens changed after 2010, when the incursion that captured Dudus Coke ended the Coke dynasty's formal hold on the community. The garrison model was disrupted, not eliminated, but reorganized around new names, new hierarchies. The same invisible borders redrawn in slightly different places. The children who lined the streets to watch the green and white CBR are in their 30s now. Some left, some stayed. The ones who stayed grew up watching the men who replaced him, learning the same lessons, absorbing the same available education, the education that rode past them at night on a motorcycle that never switched off. Christopher Miller's name is in a Jamaica Observer article from 2008. His body was found on a road in Bernard Lodge. He had been shot elsewhere. Nobody knew exactly who had done it. Nobody would be charged. He was 41 years old. The motorcycle was never found. The question that his death left open, who killed him, and why, and what they thought they were protecting by keeping it secret, remains unanswered 16 years later. Not because the answer doesn't exist, not because nobody knows, but because in Tivoli Gardens, some answers are more dangerous than the questions that produce them. The green and white CBR never switched off, until the night it did. Drop a comment. Who do you believe killed Nu Puss, and why has nobody been charged in 16 years? Subscribe to Caribbean Underworld. New videos every day. The stories that the official record buries.